Ladies and gentlemen of the shadows, welcome once more to the shadow behind you, where the veil between the living and the forgotten grows thin, and the echoes of lost souls claw their way back into our world. Tonight we venture into the mist, shrouded hollows of the Missouri Ozarks, a land where the mountains swallow secrets and the rivers run black with unspoken sins. It's 1926, a time when the world outside buzzes with jazz and flappers, but here in these ancient hills, time moves differently, slower, heavier, laced with the weight of curses that refuse to die. Imagine, if you will, the dense canopy of oaks and hickories pressing down like a lid on a forgotten grave. The air is thick with the scent of damp earth and wild honeysuckle, masking something foller beneath, perhaps the rot of buried bones or the metallic tang of blood long spilled. In these isolated hamlets, where dirt roads twist like veins through the wilderness, families cling to bloodlines as old as the rocks themselves. But some bloodlines are tainted, poisoned by deeds so dark they warp the very fabric of reality. Our tale centers on Catherine Caldwell, a woman whose name now whispers through the wind like a warning. Born into the Caldwell clan, a lineage rumored to trace back to Scottish immigrants who fled the old world's witches' pyres, Catherine was no ordinary soul. She was beautiful in that ethereal way, pale skin like moonlight on frost, eyes the color of storm clouds brewing over the ridges. But beauty in the Ozarks often hides a curse, and Catherine's final days were a descent into a nightmare that blurred the line between the living and the spectral. It began innocently enough, or so the faded journals and whispered testimonies suggest. A young woman of 24, living in the shadow of her family's crumbling homestead near the town of Willow Creek, a place where the creek itself seems to murmur names of the drowned. Catherine had returned from a brief stint in St. Louis, where the city's lights had dazzled her, only to find the Ozarks calling her back with an insistence that felt almost alive. She spoke of dreams, vivid and unrelenting, where figures from the past beckoned her into the fog-shrouded woods. But what makes this mystery so chilling isn't just the disappearance. Oh no, dear listener. It's the way the land itself seemed to conspire against her. Neighbors reported strange lights flickering in the hollows at midnight, like Willow, the wisps leading the unwary to their doom. Animals grew restless, howling at shadows that moved without form. And Catherine, she began to change. Her once vibrant laughter turned to murmurs, her steps hesitant, as if she walked a path only she could see, one leading straight into oblivion. Why does this story grip us so? Because it taps into that primal fear, the idea that our ancestors' sins don't die with them. They linger, festering in the soil, waiting for the right vessel to unleash them. In the Ozarks of 1926, amid economic hardship and prohibition's bootleg shadows, such tales weren't mere folklore, they were lived truths. Families vanished overnight, swallowed by feuds or the unforgiving terrain, their homes left to rot like open wounds. As we delve deeper, feel the chill creep up your spine. Is that a draft in your room? Or the breath of Catherine herself urging you to listen? For in her final days, she uncovered something buried, not just in the earth, but in her very blood. A mystery that defies explanation, blending the mundane horrors of isolation with the supernatural dread of the unseen. Stay with me as we peel back the layers of this forgotten enigma, step by shadowed step. The shadow behind you grows longer, and it hungers for the truth. But before we plunge into the heart of the narrative, let me paint the scene more vividly. The Missouri Ozarks in 1926 were a world unto themselves. The Great War had ended, but its scars lingered in the form of shocked veterans returning to farms that barely sustained them. The Volstead Act had turned moonshine into a deadly trade, with stills hidden in caves where echoes carried warnings of revenuers and rivals alike. Superstitions ran deep, granny witches brewed remedies from roots and herbs, while tales of haints, that's ghosts, for the uninitiated kept children indoors after dusk. Catherine's family homestead sat on a ridge overlooking Willow Creek, a serpentine waterway fed by karst springs that bubbled up from underground caverns. These caves, riddled with labyrinthine passages, were said to house the spirits of native Osage tribes displaced long ago, their grievances manifesting as eerie moans in the wind. Catherine, educated beyond most in her community, thanks to a stint at a St. Louis finishing school, kept a diary that survives in fragments, its pages yellowed and ink smeared as if by frantic hands. In those entries, she describes the first omen, a raven perched on her windowsill, its beak tapping Morse code against the glass. Tap, 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 like a summons from beyond. She dismissed it at first, attributing it to the isolation that plagued many Ozark women. But as the days wore on, the taps grew insistent, sensing with her heartbeat in the quiet hours before dawn. What drew Catherine back to this forsaken place? Rumors swirled of a family inheritance, not gold or land, but a relic, an old locket said to contain a lock of hair from a Caldwell ancestor burned at the stake in 1692 Salem.
Yes.
The witch trial's tendrils reached even here, carried by fleeing descendants. Catherine's grandmother, Eliza Caldwell, had warned her, "The blood remembers, child. It calls its own home." And so, the hook is set. As we embark on this journey, ask yourself, what if the past isn't buried? What if it's waiting, patient as the mountains, to claim its due? Lean in closer, for the tale of Catherine Caldwell's final days is about to unfold. A story of vanishing echoes, cursed whispers, and a mystery that might just mirror the shadows in your own lineage. Now let us step into the mist of 1926, where the Missouri Ozarks cradle their secrets like a mother hiding a malformed child. Our story begins in earnest on a crisp autumn morning in late September, when Catherine Caldwell alighted from the rattling train at the Willow Creek Depot. The station was little more than a weathered shack, its boards creaking under the weight of years, surrounded by hills that rolled like the backs of slumbering giants. The air was sharp with the scent of pine resin and wood smoke from distant cabins, an aroma that masked the underlying decay of fallen leaves turning to mulch. Catherine, dressed in a simple woolen coat that spoke of city fashions ill-suited to rural life, clutched her valise tightly. Her face, framed by auburn curls escaping her cloche hat, bore the pallor of one who had seen too much of the world's haste. St. Louis had been a whirlwind. Dance halls pulsing with Charleston rhythms, speakeasies where gin flowed like forbidden rivers. But a telegram had summoned her back. Her father, Elijah Caldwell, lay ill, his lungs ravaged by the black dust of the lead mines that dotted the region. Elijah was a stern man, forged in the fires of Ozark hardship. At 58, he embodied the Caldwell resilience, or stubbornness, depending on who you asked. The family farm, a sprawling 200 acres of rocky soil and dense woodland, had been in their possession since the 1840s, when great-grandfather Harlan Caldwell claimed it after fleeing persecution in the East. Harlan's wife, reputed to be a seer, had brought with her tales of visions that guided them through blizzards and Indian raids. But such gifts in the Ozarks were double-edged swords. As Catherine trudged the 3-mile path home, gravel crunching under her heels, she felt the land's eyes upon her. The trees whispered in the breeze, their branches like skeletal fingers reaching out. Birds fell silent as she passed, and once, she swore she saw a figure dart between the trunks, a shadow too tall, too thin to be human. Shaking it off as fatigue, she pressed on. The homestead loomed at the end of the trail, a 2-story log cabin, its chinks sealed with mud and moss, flanked by a barn sagging under vines. Smoke curled lazily from the chimney, carrying the scent of cornbread and stew. Her mother, Martha Caldwell, waited on the porch, her apron dusted with flour, eyes hollowed by worry. Martha was the quiet force of the family, a woman who spoke little but knew much, rumored to brew poultices that could heal wounds overnight or curse an enemy with fever. "Child, you've come," Martha said, her voice a rasp like dry leaves. She embraced Catherine, but there was a stiffness, as if holding back a flood. Inside, the house was dim, lit by kerosene lamps that cast flickering shadows on walls papered with faded newsprint. Elijah lay in the back room, his breath wheezing like wind through a cracked flue. "Katie," he murmured, using her childhood name. His hand, calloused from years in the mines, gripped hers with surprising strength. "There's things I should have told you," The blood, it don't forget. Catherine dismissed it as delirium, tending to him with broth and cool cloths. But that night, as thunder rumbled over the ridges, the first true strangeness descended. She awoke to a scratching at her bedroom door. Not claws, but nails, human and desperate. Heart-pounding, she lit a candle and opened it, finding only empty hallway. Yet on the floorboards, faint marks gleamed, scratches forming letters, return. Sleep evaded her after that. The next days blurred into a routine of chores, milking the cow whose udder yielded milk, soared overnight, gathering eggs from hens that pecked at invisible foes. Neighbors trickled in. Old Jeb Harlan from down the hollow, his face creased like old leather, bearing moonshine in a mason jar. Storms come in missy. Not the rain kind. His eyes darted to the woods, where mist clung like shrouds. Then came Silas Thorne, the local preacher, a gaunt man with a Bible worn thin from fervent gripping. He preached at the one-room church on Sundays, warning of devils in the caves. "Your pay's ailing 'cause the land's hungry," he intoned, his voice echoing in the parlor. "Caldwell's got old debts." Catherine laughed it off, but unease gnawed. She explored the attic, dust motes dancing in slants of light, uncovering trunks of relics, yellowed letters from Salem kin, a tarnished locket with a portrait of a woman whose eyes seemed to follow her. Inside, a strand of hair black as midnight. As she held it, a chill seeped into her bones, and visions flashed, flames licking at stakes, screams piercing the night. By mid-October, Elijah's condition worsened. He raved of the Watcher in the woods, an entity tied to the family curse. Legend had it that Harlan Caldwell had betrayed a Osage shaman during a land dispute, stealing a sacred amulet that brought prosperity but demanded blood in return. Every generation, it claimed one soul. Catherine's dreams intensified. She wandered fog-laden paths, pursued by whispers. One morning, she found her mirror cracked, a web of fractures forming a face, not hers. Panic rising, she confided in her childhood friend, Leela Green, from a neighboring farm. Leela, sturdy and practical, with freckles like scattered buckshot, listened wide-eyed. "It's the Haints cat. Granny says they rise when blood calls." Together they ventured into the woods, following a trail to the old Caldwell cave, a yawning mouth in the hillside dripping with moisture. Inside, stalactites hung like fangs, and the air grew thick oppressive. They found carving spirals and eyes, etched by ancient hands. As they delved deeper, a low moan echoed, and Leela fled, screaming of shadows grasping her ankles. Catherine pressed on alone, lantern flickering. In a chamber, she discovered an altar of sorts, bones arranged in patterns, and atop it, the amulet, a stone pendant pulsing with inner light. Touching it, she felt a surge, visions overwhelming, her ancestors' sins unfolding like a grim tapestry. But as she emerged, the real terror began. That night, Elijah died, his final words. "It's comin' for you, Katie. Run." The funeral was a somber affair, townsfolk gathering under leaden skies, their faces masks of sympathy laced with fear. Whispers circulated. Caldwells are marked. Catherine, veiled in black, felt watched, not by mourners, but by something in the tree line. In the weeks that followed, isolation deepened. Martha withdrew into silence, muttering prayers. Strange occurrences mounted doors, slamming without wind, footprints circling the house in mud that smelled of grave dirt. Catherine's diary entries grew frantic. "I see her now, the woman from the locket. She beckons, her mouth a void." One evening, as twilight bled into night, a stranger arrived. A drifter named Harlan Voss, claiming distant kinship. Tall, with eyes like polished obsidian, he spoke of family lore. "The curse ain't just story, miss. It's real as the dirt under your nails." Under his guidance, Catherine delved into forbidden knowledge, poring over tomes hidden in the cellar. But Voss's presence stirred darker forces. Animals died mysteriously, their throats torn, and Catherine, she began to fade, her reflection dimming in mirrors. As winter's chill approached, the mystery coiled tighter. What was the Watcher? A ghost, a demon, or something born of human malice? The Ozarks held their breath, waiting for the unraveling. With Elijah buried in the family plot, stones marking generations of Caldwells, their epitaphs weathered to illegibility. The homestead felt emptier, a vessel drained of life. Catherine moved through days like a ghost herself, her steps echoing in rooms heavy with absence. Martha, once a pillar, crumbled. She took to rocking on the porch, eyes fixed on the woods, murmuring incantations learned from her own granny witch. The stranger, Harlan Voss, lingered like smoke from a dying fire. He claimed descent from a branched Caldwell line, one that had wandered west during the gold rush only to return empty-handed and bitter. His tales wove a web. The amulet from the cave wasn't Osage, but older, perhaps Celtic, brought across the Atlantic by witch, blood ancestors. It binds the living to the dead, he said, his voice a low rumble in the lamplight. Feeds on regret. Catherine, desperate for answers, allowed him to stay in the barn. Nights they sat by the hearth, poring over faded maps and journals. Voss's fingers, scarred from unknown labors, traced lines of lineage, but his eyes held shadows, and Catherine caught him watching her with a hunger that chilled more than the drafts seeping through cracks. The hauntings escalated. One midnight, as sleet pelted the roof like accusing fingers, Catherine awoke to singing, a ethereal melody drifting from the attic. Climbing the stairs, candle flame dancing wildly, she found the locket open on the floor, the hair within wreathing like living threads. The song resolved into words, blood for blood, debt unpaid. Terrified, she confronted Voss at dawn. "What does it want?" she demanded, her voice trembling. He smiled thinly. "You, Catherine, the last pure vessel." That day they returned to the cave, armed with lanterns and resolve. The entrance gaped wider, as if exhaling cold breath. Inside, the air thickened, walls slick with moisture that tasted of salt, tears, perhaps. Deeper, past the carvings, they reached the altar. The amulet glowed faintly and shadows stirred in corners, coalescing into forms translucent, figures of Caldwell kin, their faces twisted in agony. Voss chanted words in a tongue Catherine didn't recognize, Gaelic. "Maybe." The figures advanced, whispering accusations, betrayal, murder, a hidden grave in the woods where Harlan Caldwell had buried the shaman's kin. Catherine's head throbbed with visions, flashes of axes swinging, earth-swallowing screams. Panic surged. She grabbed the amulet, its heat searing her palm. "End it!" she cried. But Voss laughed, his form shifting in the dim light. "Foolish girl, I am the Watcher." In a blur, he lunged, revealing his true intent, not kinship, but claim. He was no drifter, but a manifestation, or perhaps a descendant possessed, drawn by the curse to harvest the bloodline's end. Struggle ensued, echoes amplifying grunts and cries. Catherine fled, amulet clutched, Voss's roars pursuing like thunder. Back at the homestead, Martha waited, shotgun in hand. "I knew," she confessed, tears streaming. "Your pay tried to break it, but it takes the strongest." Together, they barricaded doors as night fell. But the Watcher, Voss, or whatever inhabited him, circled, his silhouette visible through windows, eyes glowing like embers, noises assaulted, scratching, pounding, whispers infiltrating minds. Catherine's final entries, scrawled by flickering light, detail the siege. He speaks of eternal hunger, of souls trapped in the amulet. "I feel it pulling me apart." Dawn brought silence, but Voss had vanished, leaving only claw marks on the door. Exhausted, Catherine ventured out, following a pull to the creek. There, in the shallows, she saw reflections not her own, the witch ancestor, pleading for release. In a desperate rite, guided by half-remembered lore, she smashed the amulet on a rock. Shards scattered, and a wail rent the air, wind whipping leaves into frenzy. Visions overwhelmed, the curse lifting, spirits dissipating like mist. But freedom came at cost. That night, Catherine vanished. Martha found only her shawl by the creek, damp with dew or tears. Search parties combed the woods, finding nothing but echoed calls. Was it suicide drawn by guilt? Or did the Watcher claim her, pulling her into the shadows? Willow Creek whispered of sightings, a pale figure in the mist, forever wandering. The mystery endures, a chill that lingers in the Ozarks' bones. To truly grasp the chilling enigma of Catherine Caldwell's final days, we must delve into the rich, shadowed tapestry of the Missouri Ozarks in 1926, a region where history and folklore intertwine like roots choking ancient oaks. This was no idyllic countryside. It was a land scarred by centuries of conflict, isolation, and superstition, where the past refused to stay buried. The Ozarks, encompassing southern Missouri and spilling into Arkansas, were formed geologically eons ago, their karst topography riddled with caves, sinkholes, and springs that locals believed connected to underworld realms. By the 1920s, the area was a patchwork of small farms and mining towns, economically strained by the post-World War I depression. Lead and zinc mines, like those Elijah Caldwell toiled in, boomed briefly but left workers with silicosis and communities with polluted waters. Prohibition added fuel to the fire. Moonshining became a staple, with stills hidden in hollows, leading to violent clashes with federal agents and rival clans. The Ozarks' inhabitants, primarily of Scots, Irish descent, brought with them a cultural heritage of ballads, fiddling and storytelling that preserved old-world myths. In 1926, communities like Willow Creek, fictional but inspired by real hamlets such as those near the current river, relied on subsistence farming, with cornfields clinging to hillsides and livestock roaming free range. The Great Depression loomed, but even in the 20s, poverty bit deep. Families bartered goods at general stores, and debt led to foreclosures that fueled resentments and feuds. Mining was the lifeblood, and the curse, of many. The Tri-State mining district spanning Missouri, Kansas, and Oklahoma peaked in the 1920s, producing vast quantities of lead and zinc used in everything from paint to ammunition. Workers like Elijah descended into shafts riddled with dangerous cave-ins, explosions, and the insidious miners' consumption from dust inhalation. Superstitions abounded in the mines. Men whispered of atomic knockers, spirits that tapped warnings before collapses, or the White Lady, a ghostly apparition foretelling death. These beliefs weren't mere fancy, they provided psychological armor in a brutal industry where fatalities were commonplace. Prohibition, enacted in 1920, transformed the Ozarks into a bootlegger's paradise. The rugged terrain hid stills in caves and hollows, where corn mash fermented into potent white lightning. Rivalries erupted, families like the Caldwells might have dabbled, leading to midnight raids and bloodshed. Federal agents, dubbed revenuers, were viewed as outsiders invading sacred ground, and tales of ambushes blended with folklore of vengeful spirits guarding hidden caches. Culturally, the Ozarks pulsed with a blend of Christianity and pagan remnants. Baptist and Methodist revivals swept through tent meetings, where preachers like Silas Thorne railed against sin, often incorporating local legends to heighten fear. But beneath the piety lurked granny witches, women like Martha, skilled in herbalism, midwifery, and charms. They brewed teas from sassafras for fevers or used divining rods to find water, their practices echoing Celtic druidism filtered through Appalachian migration. Folklore was the heartbeat of Ozark life, a repository of fears and explanations for the inexplicable. Ghosts, or haints, were ubiquitous. They were restless souls denied peace, often due to violent deaths or unfinished business. Stories told of haints haunting cabins, their footsteps creaking floorboards or cold hands touching sleepers. To ward them off, folks painted doors haint blue, a color said to mimic water, which spirits couldn't cross. A tradition with roots in African Gullah culture but adapted locally. Witches featured prominently, often as shape shifters or curse weavers. The Ozark witch might be a neighbor suspected of hexing cattle or causing miscarriages. Tales like the Bell Witch, originating in Tennessee but influencing Missouri law, spoke of poltergeists tormenting families with physical assaults and prophecies. In the Ozarks, witches were tied to the land. They drew power from caves, seen as portals to the underworld. One legend recounts Melectus, a cannibal witch who lured children into forests. Her story whispered around campfires in the 1920s. Native American legends infused this mix, particularly from the Osage, who inhabited the region until forced removals in the 1830s via the Trail of Tears. The Osage viewed the Ozarks as sacred, with springs like those feeding Willow Creek believed to be dwelling places of spirits. Caves were entrances to the lower world, home to giants or horned serpents. Post-removal, their grievances lingered in folklore. Settlers reported Indian ghosts, moaning in winds or appearing as willow, the wisps, ethereal lights leading wanderers to doom, perhaps manifestations of displaced souls. The Caldwell curse echoes these elements, a betrayed shaman mirroring Osage land thefts, the amulet akin to sacred artifacts desecrated by whites. In 1926, such blends weren't unusual. As modernization crept in, radios bringing news of the Scopes trial or Lindbergh's flights, rural folk clung to traditions, seeing supernatural explanations for hardships like droughts or epidemics. Educationally, this context reveals how isolation bred resilience and paranoia. With few roads and no electricity in many areas, news traveled by word of mouth, distorting into myths. Women's roles, like Catherine's, were confined. They managed homes while men mined or farmed, but in folklore, women often wielded power as witches or seers, subverting patriarchal norms. Yet the eerie authenticity arises from documented cases. Historical records note vanishings, entire families disappearing during feuds, bodies never found, attributed to haints or curses. The 1920s saw Ozark howdy killings, hospitality turned deadly, and ghost stories served as cautionary tales, blending fact and folklore. Catherine's tale feels plucked from this era, a woman caught between progress and tradition, her bloodline haunted by colonial sins. The Ozarks weren't just backdrop, they were accomplice, their shadows nurturing mysteries that chill us still. Peeling back the layers of Catherine Caldwell's mystery reveals not just a ghost story, but a profound exploration of human frailty, where the supernatural serves as metaphor for deeper psychological and cultural wounds. In this ominous lens, we examine the symbols, fears, and universal truths embedded in her tale, maintaining the chill of forbidden knowledge. Symbolically, the amulet stands as the heart of the curse, a tangible link to inherited guilt. Crafted from stone pulsing with light, it represents the weight of ancestry, how past sins crystallize into objects that bind descendants. In psychological terms, this echoes intergenerational trauma, a concept from modern therapy where abuse or atrocity echoes through bloodlines. For the Caldwells, its colonial betrayal, Harlan's theft mirroring white settlers' displacement of Osage, a real historical trauma. The amulet's destruction, shattering like repressed memories, suggests liberation, but at cost, reflecting how confronting heritage can fracture the self. The Watcher, embodied by Voss, personifies projection of inner demons. Is he ghost, man, or hallucination? This ambiguity taps into Jungian shadows, the repressed aspects of psyche manifesting externally. Catherine's visions and fading reflections symbolize dissociation, a coping mechanism for isolation's toll. In 1920s Ozarks, women like her faced stifling roles. Returning from St. Louis, she embodies culture clash, her city ways clashing with rural superstitions, leading to alienation. Thematically, the story connects to universal fears of the unknown. The Ozarks' mist-shrouded woods evoke the sublime terror of nature's indifference, akin to Gothic literature like Poe's Fall of the House of Usher, where houses and bloodlines decay from within. Catherine's descent mirrors this, the homesteader's decaying body, haunted by familial rot. This ties to cultural trauma, Prohibition-era violence and economic despair breeding paranoia, where folklore explained chaos. Human nature's dark side emerges in betrayal motifs. Voss's kinship claim reveals exploitation, curses thrive on trust violated, reflecting feuds that tore Ozark communities. Psychologically, it's the fear of the other within, how blood ties can poison rather than protect. Universal fears of death and legacy loom. Elijah's ravings highlight mortality's terror, the Watcher symbolizing oblivion's hunger. Intellectually, the narrative critiques superstition vs rationality. Catherine's education clashes with folklore, her diary a rational anchor amid chaos, yet the supernatural prevails, suggesting reason's limits against primal instincts. This connects to broader human nature in crisis. We revert to myths for meaning as seen in global folklore where ghosts embody unresolved grief. Ominously, it probes gender dynamics. Women as curse bearers, Martha the Witch, Catherine the Vessel, echo patriarchal fears of female power. In folklore, witches subvert norms, their gifts, punishing male dominance. Catherine's fate warns of suppressing the feminine, tying to cultural traumas like witch hunts. Ultimately, the story haunts because it mirrors our shadows. What debts do we inherit? In an age of genealogy apps uncovering dark pasts, Catherine's mystery echoes urging us to confront the watcher within, lest it consume us. As the mists of our tale dissipate, leaving only the chill of unanswered whispers, we circle back to Catherine Caldwell, a woman whose final days etch an indelible scar on the Ozarks' soul. We've traversed her haunted path, from the ominous return to Willow Creek, through escalating terrors of watchers and relics, to that fateful shattering by the creek where she vanished like smoke on the wind. The homestead stands empty now, or so legends claim, its boards groaning with echoes of her steps. But what truly became of her? Did the curse claim its due, pulling her into the spectral realm to join tormented ancestors? Or was it madness born of isolation and grief, driving her to self-erasure in the unforgiving wilds? The fragments, her diary, Martha's silenced testimony, offer no closure, only riddles that deepen the dread. In this lingering shadow, remember, bloodlines are chains, forged in forgotten sins. And the Ozarks teach us they rattle eternally. As you turn off the light tonight, listen for the tap, tap, tap. Is it rain or something older? Calling you home, the shadow behind you waits. Good night if you can sleep.